Hey, Randy here. Thank you for clicking into the sermon for this week. I hope we can be a benefit or a blessing to you as you watch and listen. And our prayer is that Jesus would become more real to you than ever before. God bless you. There's a couple things happening here that is interesting in 1 Corinthians 6. And because we don't have the time to dive into the whole chapter, literally you could do 4 to 6 weeks with chapter 6 alone. There's a couple things we're going to just look at. We got to look at real quickly because of time. The first is, if you're taking notes, hey brother, don't sue your brother. So that first 8 verses, Paul is saying this. He says, don't let the secular Roman government take your petty issues and be the ones to hear all the sides and hear all the complaining and hear all the lodging of issues onto the other person. Refrain from going to that group. These are a bunch of pagans. You're using a secular group, and they're going to hear things that they don't need to hear. And he's saying, why don't you instead do this? How about loving each other, as I've been telling you to do? And how about really caring more about what's happening in their lives, in their hearts? And let's not so worry about the money. In fact, he says, don't worry about being defrauded. Go ahead and be defrauded, he says. Who cares? It's just money. Verse 7 says, why not rather suffer wrong? So who cares about the money? He says, hey brother, don't sue your brother. Number 2, it says bad news for the bad people. So same passage, it says fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, male prostitutes, sodomites, thieves, the greedy, the drunks, the abusers. He says none of those people are going to inherit the kingdom of God. So just know that. He says, now those of you that have come out of that and into the church, and you've understand your relationship with God, and you're at this new level of God, this relationship that says, I am going to live for him, and you have pulled yourself out from this lifestyle. Good. He says, that's what I want. Stay clean. Keep your eyes on Jesus. That's awesome. But then he says this, a stern warning for the Christians. I'm getting word that some in the church are still acting like outside of the church. And apparently there was a problem with sexual immorality. A lot of last chapter and this chapter dealing with it, including prostitution, as we read. And a lot of what was going on outside of the church was now seeping its way back into the church. Instead of just saying stop, quit it, Paul decided to go ahead and realize that we could make a lot more progress if we understand why. I mean, how many of you are parents of teenagers and you're still able and strong enough to raise your arm to admit? So there's something as a youth pastor for many years, I understand that at that point of adolescence, whether the parent wants to admit it or not, or understand it or not, that is the age where you need to start as a parent explaining why. So I understand the 2-year-old, 3-year-old, they're continuing saying why? And the right answer would be, because I said so. Or I'm bigger. That's also a very good answer. And you also know that those certain ages, no matter what you say, the next question again is, why? And so if you want to play that role and that relationship with your 2 or 3-year-old, that's fine. But eventually they're going to get to the age where not only do they say that to just kind of make you mad, but they really want to know, or at least they should. So Paul could say, just stop it. Please, just do us all a favor and quit acting like a pagan. He doesn't. We'll get to it in a minute. Paul explains the real reason, and we're going to look at the next few minutes is that God declares us as his children. And we then declare ourselves as his children. And we wear t-shirts, and we have bumper stickers, and we post Christian sayings on Facebook as a Christian. But we live as lonely, poor orphans. That's what Paul's dealing with. Paul says, my job is to help you understand who you are, who God is, and that beautiful relationship between you and the God that invented and created and made everything. Which leads us to the main text, 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 20. It says this, "Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you've been bought with a price. So glorify God in your body." There's the crux. In fact, the Message says this, "Or didn't you realize," and I'll just read this first line. I love how Peterson put this. It says, "Or didn't you realize that your body is a sacred place?" My job, mine, right here, is to not just tell us, and me included, to stay clean. There's a lot more at play. And there's something so much in play that could actually transform your life completely. Number one, if you're taking notes, we have been signed, sealed, and what? Does anyone want to sing it? And the key word, verse 20, it says, "You have been bought with a price." The key word is bought. Say with me, bought. We have been bought. And this metaphor that Paul gives us is a metaphor that was well known 2,000 years ago. It's the metaphor of this, is that you have been bought with a price like a bondservant. We'll get to it in a minute, but we have to understand that the basis of this verse, and by the way, we're going to look at these two verses in a functional set and not in a verse by verse set. So if you're wondering why we're going to verse 20 first, it's because the first thing that we know is that you have been bought, you've been purchased. Somebody like God came and literally dealt out the cash for you. What did he buy you from? He bought you from bondage and sin. And so now we no longer have to live those lives. We have been purchased, we have been bought, and now we have a new owner. Now, the slavery back then in the Bible times, particularly in this part of the world, is not the slavery that we would think of today. Bondservant is someone that would actually go and make himself or herself a slave, meaning I owe debt to these people. I have no way to feed my family. I owe too much to these people. They're after me. And then you go to a rich person and they say, "I'd like to be a bondservant to you." And so they go around and they start handing out hundreds and thousands everywhere they go. And that person gets bought. And that guy goes, "Good. Now I've got that set of problems behind me. I have been bought by someone else, and now my allegiance is to this person who has bought me." So number one, we have been signed, sealed, and delivered. Number two, you're not the boss of you, at least you're not anymore. And so verse 19, it says, "You are not your own." And the key word there is not your own. Say that, not your own. So now we know that we've been bought. Someone came and actually flipped out the money through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, paid the penalty for all of what we owed and what others that we owed them. And he says, now we've been bought. He says this, now you're not the boss. He is. And I don't belong to me. And as I sat and thought about that verse and that concept, I realized that there is a huge disconnect between that theological statement and declaration and the practical statement of that. And it's humbling. As I come to grips that no matter what happens in my life, I'm not the boss of me. And who am I to tell God what needs to happen in my life? And when I understand this new relationship, that I've been bought with a price and I am not my own, it literally changes my entire perspective on everything. There's two things that happen. It's humiliating because all of that pride that I built up in my skills and my abilities and my knowledge and my accomplishments, they all just kind of go away. But then there's something else that happens. It's freeing. One of the reasons why we have a close relationship with the Teen Challenge guys is Cody, who played bass for us here and often does, and Kirby, who's filling in this time where we're between worship pastors here up front, is those men, no one understands better than those men what it means to be bought out of bondage and made free. And if the message today is only one, that I'm not the boss of me, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the fact that tomorrow morning, when you face I don't want to say persecution, because I don't know if we even know what that means, looks like today in this culture, but when we face things that we don't have any control over, or people, or situations, or health, or finances, or whatever, when we face those head on, that our first instinct is not, I deserve, but rather our first instinct is, I am God's, and so are my problems. Nothing's more freeing. If I was going to be totally transparent with you, this past week was a dark week for me. Bob and I had a conversation right over here in these seats this morning for about a half an hour, and it was, Bob, where are you? I hope you don't mind me. Yeah, we both had a hard week. And as we kind of were sitting talking, we realized that we found ourselves in a very similar spot. And we realized that our pride is disguised so well that at times there's no way you can identify it. How long have you known Jesus? So 100 years. And there's something embarrassing for me. I'm not speaking for you anymore, Bob. I'll just speak for me. There's something embarrassing that I forget. Not theologically. I'll check those off. I'll take all the tests, and I'll answer those 99% of the time correct. I've taken an awful lot of Bible tests in my day. But the one that I have a hard time checking off in my heart is that I really, really believe that I'm not my own. And as I think about the dilemmas that this little church, and I say little, I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean that we don't have our own building, and there's so much huge churches around us. I don't mean that in a demeaning way at all. I'd rather be here than anywhere. I mean that with all my heart. But with this church, we face things, and this week they just all seem to converge, all at the same time. And there was a moment this week that I just had to ask, God, what are you doing? And I sent a text to my mentor pastor here in town who's given me an awful lot of time, effort, and energy. And he reminded me in different words that God paid for me. And I'm his. And he owns me. And that he literally was sitting next to me. Literally sitting next to me. Understanding completely what I was going through. And I read his text, and just everything in me just finally just gave up. And I experienced complete surrender, at least for that moment. God, this is yours. If you were to be honest, would you, like me, admit that you don't know what God's doing, but you know he's up to something? Me too. So when Paul says, you're not the boss of you, what he's meaning to say is, you're not the boss of you. And in the Greek, it means, you're not the boss of you. And in Spanish, it means, you're not the boss of you. And quit thinking that you're the boss of you. Because you're not the boss of you. And I just thought that I'd get some age or some ability to get this spiritual point in my life where I could just kind of see down the road and see things. And what I'm realizing is the older I get, I was going to say the worse I can see. And that's figuratively, spiritually, and physically, yes. And God says, the more faith you have, the less I'm going to let you walk by sight. And I hate it. I sent a note to a couple friends on Friday, because Friday at about 3 o'clock we had 2 wins. In fact, AJ was in the office, and we had 2 people come on board as volunteers that are going to just make a huge difference in my life. And so the office was all cleared out about 5 o'clock on Thursday at the end of our work week. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he says, "You got a couple wins today, didn't you?" And I go, "I needed a couple wins today." But you know what? God didn't owe me a win. He never does. Do you know what he owes me? Nothing. But he knows that at times we need to be able to see. And he goes, "Let me just give you a glimpse that I'm still at work." And I ask, "Just hang in there." Oh, and here. And it's like he just kind of throws me a bone. And I'm like, "Oh man, I needed that bone." Hey, do you need a bone? Some of you are at a point in your life where you go, "God hasn't thrown me a bone in a while." I don't know when he's going to throw you that, but I do know this, is he paid for you, signed, sealed, and delivered, and you're not the boss of you. Number 3, God's in the house, in your house. Verse 19, your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. The key word is temple. Say that, temple. And I know that it's hard to realize that this is his temple. I mean, I'm doing what I can. We're getting up early Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Now I've got 2 of my trainers here. It's getting worse. And we're doing what we can. And he does care about my physical temple, but you know what he cares about more than anything else is my spiritual temple. In fact, he uses the word, "don't you know?" And I like those words. Those are flyover words. I call those flyovers, words that you might miss typically. But these are words that he's saying this. Listen, don't you know Are you not aware? Do you not remember? We've had this conversation. Now I sound like a parent of a teen, right? Have we not talked about this before? And then the answer is always, I don't know. He says, don't you know that your body, you're the temple? What's that mean? Well, it's a metaphor. We literally don't have, the spirit is the spirit and our body is physical. But there is an influence, there is a connection, there is a filling that takes place in our bodies. And God says, okay, first of all, I've bought you. Secondly, you're not your own. You're not the boss of you. And now he says this, you are the temple. Now, why is that so special? Well, if you understand the temple was built for God, symbol of God, and dwelled by the presence of God, and protected and kept pure by men. Meaning the temple in Jerusalem. How many of you been? You've been to the Temple Mount. Many of you have. So you know that there's a mosque on that today, and that if we're understanding our end times theology correctly, and I believe we have good reason to believe that there will again be the temple of God that sits on top of that. And the Muslims are doing everything they can to make sure that that never happens. In fact, the Jews and Christians are not allowed to be on the Temple Mount and pray. You're not allowed to touch anyone. You're not allowed to. One time I saw some friends of ours a couple trips ago. They were kind of getting their picture, and I came up behind them as a goofball as I am, and I was going to be a little less subtle, and I just kind of came over them and got in the middle of this picture with my arms around them, and it was like I committed horrible atrocity against the country, and I had men come from every direction screaming and yell at me because you're not allowed to touch. And I didn't know what was going on, and so I backed off, and I thought I was dead, is what I thought I was. And so you're not allowed to touch, you're not allowed to do those things, you're not allowed, but you're especially not allowed to pray to anyone except to Allah on the Temple Mount. And so that spot is the holiest spot on earth. If you ask anyone from the Jewish faith and you ask anyone from the Muslims, that is the place to be. And because that temple was built for God, it indwelled by God, it was a symbol of God in all of his majesty, and it was responsibility of the Jews at the time to protect the temple. Romans 8 says, and the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you. The same spirit that took Jesus, the Son of God, and raised him from dead on the third day, says, listen, it's the same spirit that raised Jesus who lives in you. And instead, we look at that and we go, that's nice. At least I do. But then it gets crazier. It says, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies. It's not my house. He bought. I'm not the boss. And now that old body of yours becomes literally and spiritually and figuratively and metaphorically a temple of God. And for that, you would think our response would be, oh yeah. You go to all your friends. That's how I roll. I'm the temple. Till you understand that you did nothing to earn it. Nothing. God says, this is how special you are. And what do we do instead? I doubt him. I question him. I complain to him. I whine to him. He gives me all of that, and what do I do in response? I want more. Yesterday I stopped off to get lunch, and And because I'm not eating a whole lot of carbs, in heaven, I guess I'm going to make up for it. I don't know. That's what I've been told. So the best place that I thought I could go when I was driving through Arrowhead is I'll go to the Old Country Buffet, which none of my family would go with me, and so I was by myself. And so you can have as much meat as you want until someone taps you on the shoulder and says, "Pal, it's time for you to go. You're putting a dent in this place." And so I sat down, and I had my chicken, and I had my fish, and I loaded it all up. And I'm sitting, and the entire lunch was ruined by a 2-year-old who, typically I like kids, but this one was just and just screaming. And I look over, you ever look at a kid screaming and the whole table, no one seems to recognize that there is a child screaming? You ever see that? And you kind of scratch your head and going, does that not hurt your ears too? And typically, I don't believe that children should be spanked. Not all the time do I think children should be spanked. And so this went on, and I'm trying my best, and I'm wishing I had headphones. I'm thinking about moving, and I thought I had 5 plates of meat, so that would take in a whole, so I couldn't do that. And so I just kept, and then they came around, and then the mom is walking, and then I hear her going, "Come this way." And then the little boy's going, "No, no, no, me." And I'm like, just pick the kid up and just carry the kid. And then she said, "The cake is this way." And the little one went like, "Row?" Similar to what I would do if you said, "Pastor Randy, the cake is this way." I'd go, "Cake?" And so she wasn't fazed by this little one screaming at the top of his or her lungs. But when she said cake, it all got, and then all of a sudden, we're heading off to cake. I am not like the mom in this story, unfortunately. You know who I am? I'm the 2-year-old. And I say, "God, I want to go this way. I want to go this way. I want to go this way." And he goes, "No. But I want to go this way." And you go, "No. No." And then so if I get a little louder, or if I maybe cry, or if I have a temper, and so figuratively, spiritually speaking, just picture me in the middle of fries in the produce section, sitting on the floor with my arms crossed, having a temper tantrum. That's who I am. God says, "No, no, 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 no." And I expect him to say, "But there's cake." God doesn't owe me cake. And sometimes I'm learning is the best way to be faithful is just to stay where you're planted and let God work out the details. Last point, your wish is my command. It's the least that I can do. Verse 20, it says, glorify God in your body. And the key word's glorify. Say glorify. In fact, say glorify again. Glorify. So God says, hey, that body that I gave you, remember, bought it. You're not the boss. It's my temple. Now use it to glorify, or another word would be honor him, not yourself. You see, that whole passage, remember that whole passage in the verse in there that it said, food is for my stomach? So what they're saying at the time is, hey, listen, now that I'm free, Romans chapter 12 that Joyce read, that now that I can do whatever I want, I'm free. And Paul says, no. No, you're not free to do what you want. Now you're free to honor and glorify God. And one of the things you can do or not do is allow sexual immorality to come out of your body. And we give all the excuses. Well, I love her. Or we can't afford our own place or our own places. And well, we're married I love this one. We're married in the eyes of God. And I had some reach out to me from I don't know, Florida. And they said they wanted to come in town and they wanted to get married, but they wanted to get married in the eyes of God and not the state. And I said, so you don't want to really get married? And they said, no. You don't understand. We want to get married, but we just want to get married in the sight of God. And I said, oh, no, I understand. What you're saying is you don't really want to get married. They said, well, maybe you're not the best wedding pastor for us. I guess maybe not. And remember that whole list of the temple 2,000 years ago? The same one can be applied to you. Listen, built for God, symbol of God, indwelled by the presence of God, and protected and kept pure for God by me. That's my job. And some days it's harder than others. But it's the least I can do. If we believe that He is enough, and He is able, and He is alive, then we're going to do all that we can do to honor God with our bodies. Yes, I'd like to continue to drop pounds. Yes, I would love to fit into some t-shirts that have been just like in a museum in my closet for the last 6 months. I'd love to be able to do that. But you know what I care more about than this body, this physical body? Is that I want my heart and my mind and my soul to be clean before Him. And I want it to be a place where He can live and dwell and work and move. So when that moment arises in my life, that happens way too often, and I need to have trust at a whole new level, God says, I bought you. You're not the boss of you. I live in you. Honor me. That's what He's calling us to. It's finances, it's relationships, it's trust. And as you continue to enter in these doors, Paul has a message for us. You're messy, but it's okay. We're kind of getting it all together. We're figuring it out. And then we're going to encourage each other to trust at another level. Are you in? More than